And I think it's a horrible mistake. The sort of high, you know, high perspective that we give leadership. Oh, well, it's a position, you got to reach a certain whatever. No, you're already leading. And if you lead yourself well enough, someday you'll get an opportunity to lead others.
Yeah.
That's my perspective. That's why I called it Private Leader. It's all about inward development.
Welcome everyone to A Better World Begins Within. The purpose of this show is to share stories from people who have overcome challenges in their life by looking within themselves to find the answers. So today I am joined by my friend, Mark Davy. Mark, welcome to A Better World Begins Within, my friend.
Hey, thanks, Stan, for having me.
Yeah, no problem. So I haven't told you this question yet, but we got to start with your mystery question. Are you ready?
Yeah, sure.
All right. So let's pretend you're walking through the forest. There's nobody else around. You look behind a tree and there's a magic lamp behind the tree. You pick it up, you rub it, and this genie pops out and he says, "Hello, Mark. I'm your magic genie, but I'm a very specific genie. I'm the genie of pizzas." You get one wish, one pizza, and only one topping on it. What pizza do you wish for?
That would be pepperoni.
Oh, just going basic.
Yeah, that's a good, that's my go-to pizza when I'm trying out a new pizza place. Like if you can't do the standard pepperoni, well, then I'll leave the rest of them.
Fair enough. I like it. All right. So, Mark, I'll just give you a quick introduction here and then I'll let you take it away. But in 2012, Mark left the corporate world for nonprofit management, serving as the COO and then the CEO of a global nonprofit working in 14 countries. During that time, he sought leadership development for himself and his team and fell in love with the process of leadership development. In 2018, Mark began devoting his full-time efforts to supporting other leaders in their growth and development. Mark is the founder and CEO of Private Leader, a leadership development platform that uses unique peer challenge model to help leaders solve their biggest challenges. Mark was born and raised in Michigan and graduated from the University of Michigan with a Bachelor of Business Administration. He lives in Parker with his wife, Rochelle. All right, so tell us a little bit about that, Mark. I mean, what are you doing right now? You have your own company, you're working with leaders. What does that look like? What are you doing?
Right. Yeah, great question. So I currently run this business called Private Leader, as you mentioned, and I took a little bit of a unique approach. And so through my own seeking for leadership development for myself, when I was in a executive position, I came around a lot of different formats, a lot of different approaches to leadership development. And when I started in this business for myself, I was doing some of those same things for my clients, the one-on-one coaching and the group coaching. But I ended up landing on, if you will, or developing through really necessity more than anything else, the way I saw it for my clients, as to what would help them the most. And so really what I'm focused on right now is this model, the challenge model that you mentioned. I call them peer challenge groups. And essentially what that looks like is five people, and I'll call them people at this point, getting together usually once a month. Each one of them brings a challenge to the group. We call it a challenge. And I've got a methodology for how they bring that to the group and describe it. But during these meetings, I'm doing nothing but facilitating a discussion between these executives to find clarity and help resolve this challenge. And I find, the biggest problem that executives have, and really all of us, as it turns out, is our biggest problem is figuring out and clarifying what our biggest challenge is, right?
Right.
We're faced,
right?
Yeah, exactly. Right. In a complex world, we're faced, so you could get up and pick from a couple of dozen things every single day to choose from, to chew on and work on, and they would all be good things, right? We've got a lot on our plates, but what if I were to ask you, Dan, tell me or determine for yourself what your biggest challenge is? Maybe one that's at the root of all these other things, or that's hard to do. It's hard,
right?
So I developed these tools.
Process.
Exactly.
That, right?
Yep. So I developed some tools. So my members have a check-in process. They spend, could be 30 minutes, could be an hour prior to our meeting every month. I have some tools for them to use to assess what that challenge should be,
Mhm.
and for them to articulate it kind of in writing, if you will, in the tool, and then bring that to the meeting. So our meetings are very condensed and efficient. A lot of peer groups that would be similar to what I'm doing. They're all day long. That's hard for anybody to carve out a whole day. So my meetings are 3 hours or less, and all 5 people get to go through a round. And I kind of termed it the 29-minute challenge. So you can present your challenge and get feedback in 29 minutes. Everybody gets a round, and then we're done within 3 hours.
So, so a big part of what you're doing is getting people to understand what their challenge is. Excuse me. What are you starting to see? Not starting to see, but what have you seen as the results of that, right? Going through this work, what are they getting out of it?
Yeah. So frequently what I'll hear in the middle of the meeting, as the rest of the group members are dissecting and chewing on, and we ask a lot of questions.
Mhm.
In a lot of ways, questions are the answer. I have found that many of my members, it turns out, this is kind of a philosophy on my part, that most of us already kind of have the answer we need within us.
Mhm.
We just need others to help draw it out. And so
Absolutely.
that's very much a part of what we do. The meetings are designed for that, the challenge rounds. But I will frequently hear a member whose challenge has been presented, and then other people are questioning about it, and I hear them go, "Oh,"
Right.
it's like the light,
Right.
and afterwards they have just a short time to give a little bit of feedback and also tell us what they're going to do, how they're going to pursue it. And often it is something they're like, I kind of figured, or I,
Yeah.
I
Well,
suspected.
do you find though that initially when they come in, especially if you're talking with executives and things like that, these are driven people typically, right? They're the kind of people that are like, it's my way or the highway. Very broad generalization, right? But they're driven.
Right.
And so do you find that they come in thinking that the problem is, it's the company's fault, it's my employee's fault, it's my this fault, it's that fault, only to realize that really we're the only ones that are in control of our own fate? Like, do you see those kinds of transitions with some of these guys?
Absolutely,
Or
absolutely.
guys
And
and
I
women?
That's a great point. And I think it's whether we're an executive or a mom or a nurse, um, it's often comforting, if you will, to think that the problem is external and then my solution is external. So
Hmm.
it's
Right.
something that's happening, in an external sense, like you described, and then I just need a tool. I need to plug a tool in, and
Right.
then I get my resolution, right?
Right.
And correct, it is often an internal thing, at least from the perspective standpoint, right? At
Hmm.
least from the way they're looking at it. It is an internal process I often point out the difference between perspective and perception.
Yeah.
um, it's hard to change your perspective because it's sort of like if you're standing at the edge of the Grand Canyon and someone says, "Hey, change your perspective." It's like, well, I don't know what, I have to get in the car and like drive somewhere, right? It's
Yeah.
hard to change your perspective. But if someone says, "Well, change your perception," right? What are you seeing? And they
Right.
start to ask questions about, well, what do you really see there?
Hmm.
That's a lot of what we're doing.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, and it's so needed. So why don't we take a step back in time here? You know, what led you First of all, what led you to the transition in your life? Because listen, you're the CEO. You had good positions, right? You had every reason, more than likely, to just stay in those positions, make your money, retire, and yada yada yada. But instead, you decided, you know what, something's not working, and I want to help. So, can you tell us a little bit about your journey that led you into those leadership positions, those executive positions, I should say, and then what led you to transition out of that?
sure. Yeah. Well, so I graduated with a business degree, with every intention of going into some form of business, and actually started a business right out of college. I started an internet service provider back in the day when it was a big thing to provide, internet connectivity to companies.
Right.
A partner and I just started that, and I ended up getting out of that and into advertising and marketing, and was always interested, in business, and just figured that I would like climb the corporate ladder.
Right.
It's just that's kind of a
just what you
natural.
do, right?
Yeah, it's a natural aspiration,
Yeah.
if you will, that type of thing, or it's something that's going to inevitably happen if you keep working.
Right.
But I had
Can
never.
sorry to interrupt you.
Sure.
So looking at that aspect right there, right? How many people, and this is a rhetorical question, but how many people out there, have that same mindset? This is just what you do. You
Right.
get a job, you work your way up the ladder, you get as high as you can, you make some money, you retire, and you're done, right? Can you take us a little bit into like your frame of mind? What was your thought process as you were, kind of coming out of college? What was your motivation? What was your driving factor? What was it that led you to say, I'm just going to climb the corporate ladder? Because not everybody does that, right?
Right. Well, I can boil it down to one word: me.
Mm,
It was about me.
yeah.
And I don't know that I thought that way at the time. Again, it's like you talk about, perception.
Hmm.
My perception was that's fine. That's what you should be doing. You should be pursuing things for yourself. Um, right. And the world tells you that. It's like, think,
Right.
put yourself first, and, you should have goals and aspirations, and you need to reach them. And
Crush it.
shame, yeah, shame on you if you don't,
Right.
those are normal, natural things to run into. And so, yeah, it was about me. I just looking back, when I was younger, I didn't spend, I could quote unquote, I was a good person, right? I mean, I would help a
Right.
lady across the street or whatever, but doing little acts of service, or being nice to people, is a whole lot different
Yeah.
than living your life um, for other people rather than yourself.
Right. So
So,
would you say at that time in your life, were you introspective, would you say, at that time in your life? Or was it more just like, here's where I go and I don't really know why, this is where I go?
right, yeah, no real introspection going on at that point.
Yeah.
Just, and by the way, you know things were, it's I think that's also easy to do
Yeah.
when things go pretty well for you, or, I mean, I had the same human experience everyone else does, right? There's hardships and all those things, but generally it's like I probably fairly privileged. I got to go to a good school. I graduated from University of Michigan. My parents paid for most of it. I was able to get into the internship program there and get a good job right out of college. I didn't have to really fight or work super hard for all that. So then you start taking things for granted. You're like, oh yeah, this is supposed to happen, right? I'm
Right.
supposed to be successful in some measure or whatever. Um, so that went on for quite a while. And I noticed there were several transitions in my life where, so by the way, let me preface this all by saying, while what I described on the surface, of just kind of being, I suppose you could call it complacent, but satisfied with where I was at and things going pretty well.
Right.
I recognize now where there was also a void, right?
Mm.
So deep down inside, if I had gotten introspective at that point,
Mm.
what I can see now, looking back, having the perspective that I do now in a different perception,
Hmm.
yeah, there was a void. There was something missing.
Yeah.
And I think so often that's the case with us, and we wonder, well, why am I not satisfied? And
Right.
what's wrong with my life? And isn't there more than this, right? That's that we don't always know what it is. Sometimes it's just subconscious, but it was there.
So how did you, the key question then becomes is, how'd you tap into that? Right? Because there's some people that'll live to 90 years old and they live right where you just said.
Yeah. Well, I'll
How did you
describe
turn
it
the
to you.
corner?
Yeah, I'll describe my path a little
Yeah, yeah,
more in detail, and then I'll get to that exact point.
yeah.
So, graduated from school, started working, first in my own business and then in the advertising and marketing world. 2008 comes along, and well, let me back up just a step from that. So in 2006, I realized this is the first point I think where I hit what you're talking about, and I got burned out. The marketing advertising world, it's like if you've ever seen the show Mad Men, um, that's just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, there's all kinds of compromise going on in the workplace. On top of that, I was traveling. There was times I'd leave Detroit and fly to New York, and then on a Sunday night to work on Monday and Tuesday in New York, and then fly to LA, and meeting with clients and doing client pitches, and then being on the road and trying to manage a team back at the office and get work done. By 2006, I was the better part of 2 decades into that work, or say 15 years or whatever it was, and was burned out. Just probably in many ways just a normal work way, but I can also recollect having, it seems like, extra pressures on myself than my friends did, and so on and so forth.
Right.
It wasn't just a normal 9 to 5, if you will.
Right.
So 2006, I resigned. I'm like, I'm done. And I talked to some of the clients I had at the time, and they're like, yeah, if you wanted to do some contract work, some side projects, we would be glad to have you do that. So my transition was, I resigned in like October. I worked through some final projects and left like at the end of the year, basically. Right. So January 1st, 2007, I'm an independent contractor. I thought this is going to solve everything, right? I'm my own boss now. I can, and it was probably a healthy transition, but it wasn't solving probably the internal void that I had, that I'm describing. So 2007, 2008 comes along, the economy goes bad. We all remember that.
Yep.
Well, depending on how old you are watching this, but
I remember it.
Yeah. And especially in Michigan, right? So we had like an automotive downturn, which we had these cycles, and the economy on top of it. Like, it was bad. So my brother had moved here to Colorado, to Denver, many years before, when he graduated from college. So I'd been visiting and got to know the area, had some friends here. And I'm like, you know what? Forget this. I'm getting out of Michigan. I'm like, so there was my next transition, right? I'm like, this is going to solve everything. So I moved to Denver. Again, healthy transition. I'm glad that I did it. I wouldn't do anything about that differently.
Well,
but
and sorry, just to interject really quick, I'm sure you would agree with this. We see this all the time. It happened to me. I see it in my friends. I see it all over the place. It's like, oh, if I just move somewhere, if I get a new job, if I get the promotion, then everything will be fine.
Exactly.
Right?
Changing your environment. Yeah. Which, again, as you know, can be healthy. I mean, it's not that that's a bad thing. It's just that, is it solving the ultimate issue or problem, or the void we have, or what's at the root of things, right? So moved to Denver in 2008. Moved my business with me. I kind of wanted to build a regional client base and not be traveling as much. Accomplished that. Those were all good. But still kind of had a void. And in 2010, I started going to church again. I grew up in a Christian home, and had a winding road with my faith. Let me put it that way. Like, I wasn't always like the choir boy, but had decided, this would be healthy for me to kind of redevelop my spiritual side of things, and had gotten back to church. And a friend at church had approached me one day in 2010 and said, "Hey, Mark, I sit on the board of a nonprofit, and we're looking for some help. And I know your skill set and your background, and man, I really think you could help. Would you be interested in volunteering some time? Would you be willing to do that?" Yeah. And I was like, I felt ready for it. I was like, yeah, that sounds, and I didn't really know what that meant, but I went ahead and started doing that, and it became my passion, Dan. Like, at the time, I'm like, oh, so I started spending like less and less of my time on my business as a contractor, and more time volunteering. Like, I was volunteering more and more of my time. And then 2012 rolls around, and so I had been volunteering all this time. And they said, Mark, we just talked the other day, the board, and we'd like to extend an offer to you to work full time for this nonprofit. We love the work you're doing. We think we need your skill sets on a full time basis. And I was like, okay, there you go, open door. I'm just going to do that. Back to your question about what changed. I think it changed me. And the reason why is it was the first time in my life when, this is a world missions organization. Like our job, our goal, our mission is to go into other countries, hard countries, and build schools and medical clinics and sponsor kids, and right. And I was making trips there to actually see the work getting done. And I felt fulfilled because I was doing something for someone else. I wasn't focused on myself. It wasn't just about me and my situation. So, and by the way, you get a contrast. You get to say, well, how privileged am I really, right? When you see these other folks in the world and their struggles. So very fulfilling. So that was a huge transition for me getting into the nonprofit world. And then fast forward, you mentioned I eventually, I came in as like a vice president of development and marketing, and then I became chief operating officer. So I was basically managing the whole home office and operations, and then our global operations. And then I got invited to move to a different nonprofit and be the CEO. Yeah. And that had a different effect on me. So now I felt like because of my volunteer work, I had gotten over myself. And I was in a mode now of helping other people and seeing the impact I could have on the world and all of those things. Well, now I was in a position, an executive position, where I woke up one day. I mean, that's just the way I'm going to put it. I'm sure it happened more over time. And I'm like, you know what? I've reached my limit on my leadership abilities, my leadership capacity. Like, we had over 100 people in the organization. Yeah. And I so while our work was serving, I also recognized that I was serving my employees, the people that reported to me and depended on me. And I thought, I owe them more than this, right? So I started seeking out my own leadership development. That was the huge change that we wanted to get to in this conversation. First, I had to get over myself, and then I had to realize I'm not all that. Like I have my limits. We all do, right? That's what personal development and leadership development is all about, is understanding what your limits are and then trying to build capacity. Yeah. So I sought that for myself. I got coaching. I joined a peer group, and in 2016. So it was just about a year into getting that, that leadership development. I was approached by a facilitator of one of the groups, and he said, "Mark, you really seem to enjoy this." And I'm like, well, yeah, this is my favorite day of the month. Like I get to decompress and be with other leaders and be vulnerable and work on things. And he's like, yeah, I get that. I know everybody says that, but he says, no, I mean like the process of this, like what I'm doing. And I'm kind of not sure what he means, but he said, look, if we did a couple of assessments and I were to, talk to you further about this, and, you were willing to have me mentor you, would you be interested in doing that? And I'm like, okay. So sure enough, he pointed out, it's like, I had fallen in love with the process of leadership development. Right. So fast forward again to 2018, it was compelling enough that for me to start this business. And I kind of started doing it on the side in 2017, and it just became possible for me to leave and do it full time. So in 2018, basically Private Leader was born. And I was offering as a service leadership development full time. And it was my way of, again, raising the bar. So investing in myself, my own leadership development, led me to want to help others do that for themselves.
Right. Well, and I think one of the things that's so important to point out here is that it's a journey. It's so common I would say this applies to everyone, to want it now. I just wish I could have it right now, but that's just not the way that it works. It's a journey. I'm not going to go from, feeling stuck or, whatever in my life or my business right now to 100% fulfilled, done. Well, ever. You'll never get there, but it's a process, right? And so that's why it becomes so important to enjoy that journey. And I think the other thing that's really interesting to point out here is the one thing that fascinates me about people is how frequently we can reinvent ourselves in a lifetime. You had a full-on career of 15 years doing Mad Men. Then you had, a full-on career in the nonprofit world, and now you're starting a brand new career doing this coaching, and who knows, maybe you'll do it for 20 years, maybe you'll do it for 10 years, maybe you'll do it for 30 years, maybe you'll transition after 20 into something else. Like, who knows? And when I talk to people who are 70, 80, 90 years old, and I ask them about their journey, and they talk about how they did this for 15 and this for 20 and this for another 15, and I'm like, holy cow, that's actually possible. Like, they reinvented themselves multiple times. And if someone's watching this right now and they're like, man, I wish I could get out of my dead end job and be a coach and help other people grow, or whatever it is that they want to do. I think one thing that's so important to see here is that, first of all, it's never too late. And second of all, it's a journey. It's not going to happen overnight. You've got to be on board to go travel the world like you did and realize, wow, I'm really privileged. Step one. And then, oh, I don't know everything. Step two. It takes time to get there. But the more that we focus on us and what we have control over and what we can change, the faster that process will actually go.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, being open and vulnerable, seeking, and we can't overlook either. If you think of one common element to everything I described, is it involved other people, right? An invitation from my friend to go to the non, and me being open to that, me being ready to say yes, me being self-aware. So I deal with my clients all the time. It doesn't matter what level you've reached in the corporate world in an organization. I have found the same issues, elements, problems with everyone I work with, and that is self-deception. I work on that all the time. It's so easy to be self-deceived. I am. I'm constantly aware of it, and I'm still self-deceived.
Yeah.
Right.
Meaning, like, telling yourself stories about what the problem is, or who I am, or whatever.
Yeah, or how bad it may be, or the effect it might be having on somebody. And
right.
Our brains are so good at tricking us into right, because it's a natural, not to get into all the psychology of everything, but our brains are really powerful, and they want to keep us out of trouble, and sometimes that trouble is mental, right? Like, if we truly sat down and understood and focused on the truth of everything, we'd probably end up so depressed and like, oh, I can't deal with this, right? So our brain kind of tries to block us from all that.
Yeah.
But we have to counteract it at times. You have to kind of go back and tell your brain, hey, that's a little too much comfort. Like, we need to,
so how do you, so that only comes from awareness, right? And it's almost like what comes first, the chicken or the egg kind of thing. But, it's like, I get just a little bit of awareness, and then I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And then I get a little bit more. And it's kind of like awareness, grows more awareness. Like, how did that look for you? I mean, how did you go from kind of like this kid coming out of college, just like, let's go make some money, that's what we do, to somebody who can look at an opportunity in a nonprofit and go, that's a really good opportunity, right? I mean, what happened to transition to bring that awareness to yourself? How'd you find the value in that?
Yeah, well, I'd like to say that it was all me, by my own design, or it just, some of it was happenstance. One is, and I don't recommend this route at all, but if you remember what I said about working at the agencies, I got burned out. Right. And in a way, one way of, and I have clients, right at this moment dealing with this. And so often we call it being broken. Sometimes you have to be broken. Yeah. We all have our stories about that, right? If we, and there's two ways to be broken. One is to be broken and then be like, oh, well, I'm just going to tough my way through it, or ignore it, or whatever, stuff it under, or whatever. And the other is, what's that?
That's what men do.
Yeah, exactly. It's very common with men. Or the other is to be vulnerable and go, man, I am just beat up, I'm broken, or I don't want this, or and to hear yourself say that, both to yourself and maybe to others. And I kind of got to that point, just so the stress itself of life can break you to the point where you're willing to do anything to make a change. And that can
Yeah.
force you to go, okay, I really need to come to terms with myself and why I'm miserable, or why,
So real quick, sorry to interrupt again, but with that right there, let's say that there's a guy who's, or a woman, anybody who is getting to that point where they are starting to feel broken. They're not there yet. They're not completely fed up. How can we avoid that so that we don't get to the point where it's just like, that's it? Because that's when divorces happen. That's when alcoholism happens. That's when mental breakdowns happen. Like, how can we avoid that and make those shifts now if we see it coming?
well, if at all possible, to develop some discipline. And by that, I mean to have a routine of checking in with yourself, basically. The best way to do it is with others. And because you can hear others describe, you might, even on this very podcast, or, the groups and the coaching that you and I like are involved in, give others the opportunity to hear where someone went through that. And they might identify and go, man, that's the path I'm on. Like,
Right.
are you serious? You mean that's where I might end up if, so
Right.
it's sort of a realization.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes that can only happen when you're around others and you're listening to others and they're sharing their
Mhm.
stories, or you're sharing your story about where you're at, and someone else can go, you know what? I'm just providing a word of caution. Like, you should look out for yourself, look out for it. Cause I was on that road and this is what happened.
Yeah.
Um, so the awareness doesn't necessarily have to just come from within. It can come from your environment, your friends, colleagues, people you collaborate with.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
And one of those things with that is, what I'm hearing is community,
Mhm.
um, and I think this is more of a men problem. Women, I'm sure, experience it as well, but it's definitely a big component of men is, I just got to buckle down, put my head down, shut up, shut up, shut up, shut up. I got this, I got this, I got this. We put the blinders on and we lose sight of the fact that we actually have a community around us. And if we would just open up and, talk to our community and grow with our community, we can learn so much about ourselves and the world and really change our trajectory in life. It's so important to have that
right.
aspect of community.
Exactly. Yeah. So if I had to, put it in terms of one thing, or kind of boil it down, and for me, in my experience, the way I described it, it was serving, which is a community thing. You're putting yourself around other people for their benefit.
Right.
Serving can be, spending time and mentoring a young person, or it could be taking food to someone that needs it, or serving at a shelter. In my case, it meant, contributing time, volunteering time to a nonprofit to start, and then working there, full time, and basically being in a position to serve others. But it was that serving, that servanthood, if you will, that did change me, because boy, that causes you to look at things. You're like, it feels different. And so
Right.
part of what we're talking about here is taking action, right? You have to
Right.
take action and do something. So if you're stuck in the routine where, you think, well, this is all there is to life. It's just, I'm going to earn as much money as I can and then retire and golf the rest of my life. And I think so many people end up miserable, um, you know, along that path at some point, because we are built to be in community and we're built to serve each other. And if you're not doing that, you just end up in a place, I think, that's not as desirable as you might like, call it depression, whatever. Um, so, yes, I accepted the invitation, to go and do that. It wasn't like I had designs on it. It wasn't like I said, I really need to start serving and nonprofit.
Right.
So you could say I fell into it, but at least I recognized.
Well, you had a desire. You had a desire to grow. It sounds like, right?
Right.
And sometimes that's all it takes. I just want to be better. And
Sure.
then once again, I just want to be better. And then all of a sudden, doop, a little something happens, and it's like, oh, well, that was kind of cool. I want some more
Yeah.
of that, and it kind of snowballs over time.
Right.
So let me ask you this. Now that you've arrived, now that you are, you got it all, And I say that, facetiously, obviously, but what does it feel like? I mean, and once again, I say it facetiously, right? Like we never arrive, but like, what's it feel like to be in a position where you can look back and say, hell yeah, I'm doing
Well,
it.
yeah, so that's a great point, and you're right. That was the first thing I was going to say, is that I haven't arrived. You don't. It's a journey, and so the first thing you recognize when you look back is you recognize you're on a journey, right? Like, oh, I came from there, and here I am.
Yeah.
But once you understand personal development, leadership development, whatever it is, you truly understand it, and it's working.
Yeah.
Then you don't want it to stop, right? So it's something that you realize you will do the rest of your life.
Yeah.
The one thing, it brings up one of my taglines, if you will, for Private Leader, is that the only thing that scales forever is your personal development.
I like
And
that.
John Maxwell, in one of his books, The 21 Laws of Leadership, he has the law of the lid, and the law of the lid says your organization, if you're a CEO, let's say, your organization will never outgrow you. And so you often look at these successful organizations, successful companies, the leader, whoever's leading, whoever the top executive is, they have to continue to grow.
Right.
But that's the neat thing, companies reach limits on their scalability all the time. They can only scale to this point or that point, or there's only so much market available.
Right.
Your own development doesn't have to ever end. You can scale forever.
Right. And then you can shift gears with the company. You can change directions. All of a sudden you can move the ship, into something totally new.
Right.
If you're growing as a person, you're just more open to new ideas, new opportunities, new directions. It's not like, well, this is what's worked, this is what we have to do anymore.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly. So yeah, it's a realization. It actually is exciting when you think, you grasp and understand, but then embrace the fact that, yeah, it doesn't end. You can always grow. You can always develop yourself, and so yeah, it's just an ongoing thing. But that means the journey doesn't end, right? You can always look back and see where maybe you are on the journey,
Right.
but it gets to continue. And I think really there's a lot of well, let me put it this way. We can come up with a number of examples of professional athletes or whomever it may be, that when something came to an end, like their career, they retired, they get depressed. And the reason why is because there was an end. I think it's more exciting for there not to be an end.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think that's just a perfect way to end this interview, is to say that there really is no end. It's all on, it's a spectrum, it's a journey. And that's where we find the joy, is enjoying the challenge of just playing with life, playing with, new ideas, seeing what we can create in our own life. And, when we reach the end game, I firmly believe this, that when we get to the goal, it is never, ever as satisfying or fulfilling as we ever thought it would be. So forget about that. Forget about the million in the bank. Forget about the championship. That's great. Go get it, but enjoy the journey while you're going after it. Right?
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. Well, Mark, thank you so much for joining me today. And I mean, I just love talking with you about this stuff, and I love your story, and you're doing just such amazing work for people who have a lot of influence, and there's just a huge ripple effect for that. And I think you're just doing some amazing things. If somebody is watching this and they would like to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
Sure. Well, the easiest way, you can just go to my personal website, markdavy.com. And I've got my, social media links there, LinkedIn, and my email. You can send me an email. There's even, if you scroll to the bottom, it's really, I guess, just a one-page site. There's a form there. You can just fill out a quick form and shoot me a note. But I also have a link on markdavy.com to my my professional website, my business website, privateleader.com. So you can get to everything from there, basically.
Yeah. Right on. Well, Mark, thanks again for being here. Thanks for being so open and honest and sharing your story. I know it'll impact people, so thank you.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and thank you for all of you guys that are tuning in. Remember, a better world out there starts with a better world in here. Thanks so much for watching. Here's to your journey in our world. See y'all soon.